Hello, everyone. Welcome to a conversation here over what might be lunch hour for some of you, if you're in Central Time like us, on stress and communication. This is a continuation to a certain extent of a conversation we had a couple of weeks ago, just around the different ways that people are experiencing workplace stress, the way that it's showing up for them, the way that they're navigating it, and the impacts that it's having. And so today, for the next 30 minutes, we're hoping to spend just some dedicated time kind of unpacking pieces of what we heard in that conversation and with so many of our clients and engagements around the impact of stress as it relates specifically to communication. We only have a half hour, so we want to get into it real quickly, but just so you all know kind of who we are as the Lumen Group, we are an organization that focuses on team and leadership development with a mission to reshape the way we work together and to co-create more human-centered workspaces that foster increased engagement, satisfaction, and ultimately productivity. So we have kind of been on an interesting journey here, especially the last several years, as the workforce and workspaces have changed. And so, to a certain extent, stress and burnout is something that has become more common in conversation and continues to be. So we're excited to be here today to talk about this because it is showing up so often. And the team that's with us today, my name is Dr. Megan Broger. I'm the founder and president of the Lumen Group. We also have senior consultants, Dr. Emily Hedberg and Donnie Hobbs, and our operations manager, Danielle Simmons. So we're all very interested in this topic. We're interested to hear what's useful for you on this topic and to hopefully have some really helpful communication around this because our model at the Lumen Group is what we call centered leadership. So we approach clients and engagements with this framework in mind. And the idea is that we as humans, in order to help create more human-centered workspaces, it's important for us to be aware of how centered or not we are as individuals. And so, when we continue to hear this idea of being stressed out, what we hear and what we know is that that is not just a kind of an idea that people are having. There are some real physical, physiological implications for that because stress impacts our nervous systems, and our nervous system really drives how we think, how we feel, and how we behave. And so really figuring out how we get in touch with that part of that nervous system and how our body and our brains are reacting, because that is the place that we need to start from in order to be able to connect effectively, in order to be able to communicate effectively, and in order to contribute or help to foster really positive workplace climates. So again, the part of the conversation we're going to focus on today is this idea around stress and communication. So when we are either, kind of in range and centered from a nervous system regulation standpoint, from a stress and resilience standpoint, versus when we're out of range or off center, and how disrupted not only we can feel, but how able we are to communicate effectively as well. So as we're kind of settling into the conversation here, I'm going to turn things over to Donnie to kind of get us centered a little bit before we explore communication.
Thank you, Megan. Good afternoon, everyone. So, like Megan mentioned, there are a lot of things to consider when we're talking about stress and communication. And one of the places that we like to start is with the body. Our body is constantly sending us messages, and often, especially during a really busy or stressful workday, we kind of ignore those messages. And so maybe it's a kink in the neck or sore back, or maybe we're hungry, but we're not really paying attention to that. And so we just do a really brief grounding exercise, and that's just to shift our awareness from what we're doing in the middle of our day here to how do we feel? What do we notice? And checking in, maybe checking in. How's your posture? Are you kind of bent over? Have you been bent over a keyboard or looking at multiple computer screens or in meetings all day? And just notice what your body might need right now in this moment to kind of reset, maybe realign the spine, maybe a stretch would be good. But just taking a moment to notice. And by doing that, we shift our attention from all the things that we have going on and all the things that can bring about the sensation of stress, and we shift it back to ourselves to check in, to recognize how important it is to take care of those physical symptoms and messages. So just take a moment and do what you need to do to get comfortable. Sit up, sit back, stretch, and realign so that we can recenter and move back into our day in a little bit of a different way. And after I do this exercise, I like to take just a deep, slow breath that tells my system that, okay, everything's okay. Let's reset and let's move back in to what we're doing with intentionality. And with that, I will pass it over to Emily, and we'll talk a little bit more about how stress shows up in the workplace.
Thanks for leading us through that, Donnie. I don't know about for others, but just intention. And as I'm looking at the clock, just a simple minute, maybe two, for us when we're so often flying between meetings to the next meeting on autopilot, to really just carve out a little time for ourselves in these simple activities. I noticed a shift in my posture and just how I was feeling as well. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
We talked today about just this intersection of workplace stress. So stressed individuals, stress systems, and communication. While we're going to be sharing a lot of our observations as we work with our client partners, teams that we support, we also at the Lumen Group love to ground things in data and information to really foster just some of our own understanding, and to share with you all just how, as Megan was saying, prevalent we're experiencing this idea of stress and burnout. And while that's become more prevalent, we refuse to have that really be the new normal. So as we think about this idea of communication, and communication being the backbone of any successful organization or team, it requires, as Donnie was saying, some of that intentionality, there's clarity, but also this idea of authenticity and curiosity. And when we're not thoughtful or intentional about how we show up, that can really erode trust, safety in conversations, and really lead to a more stressed out or conflict-induced setting. So I'm going to share with you some statistics that were recently published in Forbes. It was a study of the state of workplace communication in 2024. And of those participants, 89% of them reported that poor communication negatively affected them at work. About half said it reduced their productivity. 45% said it impacted their trust with leaders, colleagues, the team around them. And 42% said that it led to increased levels of stress. So as we think about wanting to foster trust, engagement, human-centered workplaces, we are really passionate about supporting individuals to really learn, and in some respects, relearn just some of those ways to effectively communicate, particularly when we're under stress, deadline, or pressure to get things accomplished. And as we think about just even the ways in which our communication has been expanded, technology, the different channels we have to reach one another, that adds a whole new layer of complexity that I'm excited for us to talk about together. So with that, as I mentioned, setting the stage with some of this data, but Megan, I would love to hear from you, as you think about some of our observations, insights, as you think about the clients that we support, how do you see stress really manifesting in communication and communication breakdowns within teams?
That you can't hear me saying because I was muted. What an important question, Emily. That's just one of the ways, right? That
Yeah.
Communication can be disrupted, especially when it's happening virtually. Sometimes we literally can't hear each other. And when stress is when we are experiencing stress, or Emily, as you said, is the systems are experiencing stress, I think it can lead to a significant amount of misinterpretation or misunderstanding. So, one of the things we heard and continue to hear so much of for organizations that don't, who are really interacting in hybrid or virtual ways, when they don't have a camera on policy, there are higher levels of miscommunication that can happen because we're missing out on, to a certain extent, 80 to 90% of those cues that we get from one another. And that creates even more stress. If I don't feel like I can understand you, I'm not sure what you're saying. Did you really mean that, or am I hearing it in this way? So I think misinterpretation is key. I think when our systems are stressed, we're just worse at listening. We're focused on what we need. If we're feeling threatened, we're feeling like we need to protect ourselves, and so we're focused on what we want to say, but not necessarily what we need to hear. And I think that contributes to that misinterpretation as well. And along with the decreased listening, I think there can be decreased empathy. So it's kind of, rather than extending benefit of the doubt, we're withholding that. And those three things, I think misinterpretation, a lack of listening, and a lack of empathy or decreased empathy can be really challenging when we're trying to communicate effectively.
Absolutely. And seeing a comment even come through in the chat, that cameras on being so vital to remote communication. And as you're saying, we miss out on big elements that can lead to that misinterpretation or misunderstandings. Donnie, I'm curious, as you think about that, how stress might impact our nonverbals. So there's, one scenario, we don't have that visual, but what about when that visual is in place? How can our nonverbals really impact that communication?
Yeah, great question. I think that when we're stressed, we just communicate differently. And, there are a lot of different statistics out there about, what percentage of communication is actually verbal versus nonverbal. And when we're stressed, our tone changes, our pace changes, how we project our voice changes. And a lot of times, I think that being under that type of stress really creates this underlying message, regardless of what's being said, of, essentially what happens is it's a stress transfer. And because, we're constantly taking in all of the nonverbal information and then trying to interpret it. And I think another thing to consider here too is, if you're a leader or on a team, it's more valuable to label how you feel, to help people understand where you're coming from. Because if you don't, you're not communicating coherently. If you're acting like everything's okay, but you're very stressed, people can pick that up, and then it throws them. And going back to that number that you shared, Emily, 45% of communication issues cause trust problems. That's a really big number. That's a problem. And so if somebody's, acting fine, but not sounding fine, that in and of itself can kind of bring that question of, can I trust what's going on here into play?
Yeah, that transparency or authenticity comes into question. And like you're saying, what we see versus what we hear, we're going to trust what we see. And that nonverbal communication is going to be more of that indicator or our gut read of what's actually happening here.
Right.
Donnie, you also bring up a good point in terms of that stress transfer. I know in a little bit, we'll be talking about, what are some things that we can do as leaders, like you're saying, communicating directly, maybe giving some context to the situation. But what about if we're observing in a colleague that seems particularly maybe stressed or overwhelmed, what could help our approach in those scenarios?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great question. I have a couple thoughts. One is that, depending on how you're communicating, if it's over email, that might be a little different, or over screen or face to face. But I think the first thing that we need to do is look for ways and develop habits of protecting ourselves. So if somebody else is stressed or, and it's coming out kind of sideways at us, we have to learn, that maybe this is more about them or the process or the project. So we don't internalize that. And that's the first step. And the second idea here gets into a little bit of biology. People's brains look for a match. So if somebody comes into a meeting and they're really upset, they're going to feel more comfortable if other people become upset.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can, so in a one-on-one context, if we can remain down here and somebody comes in and they're, upset or elevated, stressed, if we can stay down here, find ways to cope with our own stress, they will come down and join us. They won't stay up there. It might take a little while, but their brain is going to feel more comfortable when they're matching with somebody else. So those are that's one idea, or a couple ideas, I guess. And again, when you get that email, it's really easy to read that and really internalize, oh boy, I'm in trouble, or I did something wrong, or partner's mad at me. But being able to slow that process down a little bit so that we're thinking about it a little more objectively than personally.
Yeah, I really like that idea of matching, Donnie, right? What is the energy that we're really wanting to replicate in the room itself? And so we can show up a little bit differently. Megan, I'm curious from your perspective, other maybe tips or strategies, what are ways that people can help in those moments so that we don't feed maybe some of the stress or sense of overwhelm?
Yeah, the thing that came to mind really relates to that idea of matching that, and especially as we talked about from a nervous system perspective, we're going to be just kind of biologically wired to scan for anything that feels threatening, and social interactions, tone of voice, word choice, things like that, or absence of information, those things can feel like threats. And when that happens, we are more likely to react rather than to respond. So if we are engaging with a colleague, a supervisor, a leader, a direct report who is communicated in a stressed way, it's possible that we will kind of just react and want to either defend against what they're saying or match that level of intensity. But in doing that, we are kind of internalizing some of that as well. So if we can give ourselves a purposeful pause, if it's just a second, if it's 5 seconds, if it's 10 seconds, to really kind of take a step back and think about, okay, what can I influence? How do I want to engage? What might be the best thing for me to do or say in this moment to help achieve the goal, to move the conversation forward, to keep things productive? And so that we say that so often in a lot of our leadership and team development engagements that we have is it is simple, but it is not simplistic. Remembering to respond rather than react can make a huge difference.
You mentioned, Megan, that lack of information or context can be really a threat or a potential threat in the way that we interpret it. We have a great question coming in here. One of the most stressful things that comes to mind for me is receiving a request from leadership without much background, which would equip me to provide the requested information with the context that they are really looking for. How would you recommend communicating this to a member of leadership without overstepping some of those bounds? Maybe goes to your point around, how do we influence in these situations?
Yeah, absolutely. Donnie, I'm interested to hear what things come up for you, but when I heard that question, Emily, the thing that immediately popped into my mind was, what is the sense of urgency we are kind of automatically applying to the request? Maybe it was implied, and maybe it wasn't, but sometimes when we get a request, we can assume that a response is needed immediately. And when we take on that sense of urgency, it can increase kind of our level of stress and then reduce our ability to kind of be able to think as strategically or as objectively or as articulately as we may want. So one thing might be to think about, do we have clarity on by when a response is needed? Because if we do have more time than maybe it felt like we did in the moment, might give us some more opportunity to reach out to others who might have some context, who might have some more information. So it might look like, I'm happy to provide you with that information. By when would it be helpful for you to have this so that you can use it for X? So we can get clear on some of those timelines, and then we might be able to ask that leader, depending on the relationship, or again, others who we know might have context and information for us. Is there anything in particular you would like me to include in my analysis or in my response? So we can ask for some specificity potentially if that's not offered as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, love that. And I think, this is such a common conversation around emails and timeliness of a response. And, we have developed this internal driver to like, always be checking the emails, always be getting back to them as quickly as possible, whether that's to keep them from piling up or to, for the optics of like, I'm on it, I'm on my job, I'm doing a good job. And I love that, Megan, that idea to pause. And that gives us space. And when we have that space, we have the ability to choose how we want to move forward. And if we don't take that pause, then we're reactive, right? We're just jumping back in because, for whatever reason, it's important for us to look like we're all over it. We want to appear competent. And so a lot of times we hesitate to ask for clarity. And we don't feel like we should be granted extra time, and that this is coming down from above, so obviously they know what they're doing, so obviously they believe that they've given us all the information and I should know, I guess. Right? We make these assumptions, but I really like that, checking in, asking those questions. How quickly do I really need to get back here, and what would it look like if I asked for some clarity or some further guidance? So yeah, that's fantastic. Because it's a back and forth, right? It's about communication.
And it made me think, even to your comment earlier, Donnie, around that shared stress, right? If we pick up on some of that momentum, as Megan, you were saying, is it really my sense of urgency? Is that someone else's sense of urgency? And when we can really take that time to pause and sift that out a little bit, we can be really more intentional with the response versus just simply reacting. Donnie, as you were talking, it also made me think about, the cultures we're in, right? It's one thing to think about how we show up as individuals, but thoughts on how we can really create organizations or a team environment that is maybe less stressful in terms of communication, and to have that type of engagement that's going to be productive.
Yeah, that's a great question. So going back to the idea of trust, I think trust is just so important as you're working on a team or within an organization. And one of the questions that I often get is, how do I build that trust, right? People don't decide to trust someone, right? It's a feeling that people grow into. And so one way in is to demonstrate a little bit of vulnerability, and that can be a big leap for a lot of people. And where I like to start is around the idea of feedback. How are you seeking feedback? Because that can be a pretty vulnerable move to ask somebody for feedback, but starting small and or even asking for someone's opinion on something. Hey, I've got this project here and it's almost done. Could I have you take a look at it and let me know if there's anything else you would change here? Really shows that you value their opinion. And when you demonstrate that type of value for someone else, trust naturally kind of begins to grow. And I think that's one concrete way that we can step into developing. Because when we trust, the more we trust, the easier it is to manage and work through our stress. The less we trust, the more prone we are to stress, the more prone we are to be seeking out threats, around every corner. So, yeah, Megan, do you have any thoughts there?
No, I think I completely agree with everything you said. I'm noticing a little bit of stress in myself as I'm looking at the clock, and I can't believe it's already 12:25 Central Time, and we only have a few minutes left. So I'm just wondering if there are other questions or things that we want to address before we wrap up.
Yeah, I was looking at the chat as well. No additional questions from the audience, but curious, Megan or Donnie, what would be, a key takeaway? What's one thing people could take from the conversation and be able to apply right after we close?
I think hopefully just the recognition that people are juggling a lot. There are a ton of competing priorities everywhere we look. We're hearing from our clients and even experiencing ourselves. It's this feeling of trying to fit 10 pounds into a 5-pound bag. So what is it that we can do to really try to pause throughout the day, even if it's the exercise that Donnie just provided? Just check in on your posture. How are you feeling? What do you need? Do you need to stand up and stretch? Do you need a drink of water? Have you had anything to eat? Is there something that you can do just to pause, kind of reconnect, reframe, and move forward? And because sometimes we feel like we need longer breaks in order to kind of get ourselves back into a place where we feel like we can communicate, we feel like we can connect effectively. And sometimes it just takes a short pause. So whether that's a pause to check in with ourselves, whether it's a pause so that we can respond rather than react, and to do our best to lead by example. If we can lead with transparency, if we can lead with kind of an openness and vulnerability, like Donnie said, hey, I hear what you're saying. I just came out of a really busy meeting. I want to take 2 minutes just to kind of focus myself so then I can turn my attention towards you and really understand what it is that you're trying to say. Anything like that can really help to kind of turn the tide a little bit on kind of the expectation and the stress around being in an environment with other people during the workday. So, Donnie, what would you add?
Yeah, no, I love that. I think, yeah, pause is the word that came to mind for me. And I think when we think about creating change, a lot of times, it's around, creating big change, but it really doesn't need to be. It can be a breath, right? From a neuroscience perspective, one deep, slow breath resets the nervous system. Maybe not to baseline, but if you're in the middle of a really busy, stressful day, just taking that one big, deep, slow breath, and then you can get back to it. And if you do that off and on throughout the day, you're creating these little micro shifts in how you're showing up. You're managing your stress. You're letting it go a little bit at a time, and that's a great place to start. Yeah.
And we're seeing a lot of appreciation for that tip in the chat. Just, the power of that simple pause and taking a little time for ourselves throughout the course of the day so we can show up more intentionally.
So these conversations go by so quickly. We intentionally try to keep them to a half an hour. We know that that a half an hour is a lot of time. So we thank you all for being here. Hopefully you're able to, as Emily just said, kind of take something away from today, and we're gonna continue the conversation because there's so much to discover, so much to consider, so much to connect around. So on the 16th of May, we'll have this same conversation, meet in the same place. We'll be talking about stress and how it can interfere with ways that we connect and kind of create that cohesion with others. And then the 23rd of May, we'll be talking about stress and how it shows up in systems and how it can impact team climate. So If you found this helpful, we'd welcome you to continue to join us here the 16th and the 23rd. There's a QR code there, or you can head to our website and register. If you can't be here live, go ahead and register anyway, and you'll be able to get the recording afterward. So thank you all for being here today. Emily, Downey, thanks again for all of your insights, the great questions, and we hope to see you all soon. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Take care.